Hello there, and welcome to Wildcard Decks. And today we are looking at Jango Red. Now, I do try to do generally non-meta decks or leaders and cards that aren't used as much. And in my defense, I did have this deck in mind before Jango got a load of attention over the weekend after he performed particularly well in a few early tournaments. I think it is still quite early to decide as to whether this is going to be a so-called meta deck or towards the top. I think it is going to have a decent chance, um, but I do also think the meta is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy at times where a certain archetype gets a load of attention, so then loads of people play it. Well, if half the players in the tournament are playing that kind of template, then it's automatically going to skew that way. So anyway, but yeah, I do think I've got a few different things going on in this deck compared to the lists I've seen online, so we'll get into it right now. So in terms of numbers, this might be the least number of units I've shown in a deck so far, because units are my general playing style. I don't have as heavy a presence in space as the other decks I've seen. They tend to have more space than ground. In terms of resource cost, got a significant amount in the early game, but we also have a few so-called closers or, hammers. In terms of rarity, I think this is probably the most number of rares I've shown in a deck so far, so it might be a bit less feasible to put together just out of what you already have, but there are definitely going to be some things that you can swap around that will fill out kind of an equivalent utility. So Jango himself, I don't think many people were particularly on board with him when he was first unveiled, and that was probably because Boba still existed. But when a friendly unit deals damage to an enemy unit, you may exhaust this leader, and if you do, exhaust that enemy unit. Now, deals damage is any ability associated with that friendly unit. So any kind of when defeated triggers, when played, that does damage to an enemy unit can trigger Jango's exhaust ability, and that is where he becomes particularly powerful. You can, of course, still exhaust the enemy unit if you attack into them and don't defeat them, which can still be a valid play, but overall you're looking for the passive effects that will deal with damage as well, because that's where you're going to get most value. He's on the cheaper side of the leader deploys at a 5 cost, but crucially with 1 less power, which makes him, a bit more balanced than Boba, so to speak. And he becomes significantly more powerful because when he's not deployed, you can only exhaust 1 unit a phase. When he is deployed, you don't have a limit how many units you can exhaust, so he becomes significantly more powerful, and the longer you're able to keep him around, the much higher chance you're going to have of being able to win the game. We go with Tarkin Town. I haven't bothered detailing the other base with this because the other rare base is I think Shadow Collective Camp is the name, and it's to draw a card, which is just no, not in most decks you're gonna go for that. Definitely not Jango. So Tarkin Town, you're probably going to want to use it quite early on in the game because it makes it very difficult for your opponent to recover, combined with his exhausting effect. So onto the early game ground units, and this is the only Sentinel in the deck from memory. Yes, it only has 1 health, but it has 3 attacks, so it's possibly going to kill whatever runs into it. If you have the initiative as well from the start, and that's just what I should say, if you have the initiative from the very start of the game, then with Jango, it is a massive, massive, massive advantage. But yeah, can do 3 damage into base, possibly kill whatever has to run into it. Overall, it's quite useful. Crafty Smuggler, only got 2 of them. You can definitely have a case for having 3 of them instead. But shielded, so you can run it into a unit, it will survive, and with Jango's ability, you can exhaust it if that unit has also survived, which it probably will have. So even in the late game, you can run it into something particularly powerful and just take it out of commission for that phase, so it's always quite useful. Series Officer, I don't think anyone's running this in Jango that I can see, but I quite like it for, again, the effect of you can just run it into something, do some damage to it, exhaust that unit, but also with the bonus of dealing 2 damage to a base, so it's quite aggressive in that sense as well, and just keeps things ticking along. We've got 2 Ruthless Raiders as well, so combined combine them both together with their when defeated and when played effects, I think that's 14 damage to base, just if you play all of them and defeat all of them. Obviously, that's not always likely to particularly happen, but that is the potential that you've got 14 damage to base just by doing nothing really. So yeah, quite useful. Fifth brother is ridiculous with Jango if you have the initiative because of his on attack of dealing 1 damage to himself and 1 damage to another ground unit. You can pretty much always guarantee that you're going to be able to exhaust something on the ground unless they're shielded. So yeah, fifth brother is particularly good with Jango. Heavy, I haven't seen too much conversation of heavy with Jango, but I mean, the raid 2 is always going to be nice to be able to hit for 6 with a 4-cost unit, but it's the when defeated that's quite interesting because you deal 1 damage to each enemy ground unit. So if Jango isn't deployed, then you can just pick 1 to exhaust. But if Jango is deployed, then sometimes it's actually beneficial to just run heavy into an enemy unit so that he is defeated. So then you can exhaust their whole ground arena. So yeah, especially if you're getting swarmed, then yeah, it's really quite a useful play to make. Onto the later ground, and because I have Darth Maul, I put him in. In hindsight, I think heavy Persuader tank might be the better bet because you can exploit it, so it still costs the same or even cheaper than Darth Maul, and you get the 2 damage to a ground unit, so you can exhaust something straight away. With Darth Maul, I think my thinking behind it was, well, I do have Fallen Lightsaber in here, so he's another Force unit, but also because he can attack 2 units instead of 1. So if you're getting swarmed, he does help defend against that, so to speak. But also, if you have Jango out, then you can have him attack 2 different units and exhaust both of them if they don't die. So yeah, but he is kind of a one and done because if he's attacking 2 units, he's probably going to get defeated anyway. So yeah, because I have him, I put him in, but in hindsight, Heavy Persuader Tank or Count Dooku is probably a better bet. Seventh Sister is particularly good with Jango as well, because if you have the initiative, she's got Saboteur, so that's always good, but if you deal damage to the opponent's base, then you can deal 3 damage to a ground unit. So, again, same as Fifth Brother, really, in that you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to be able to exhaust a unit, but also 3 damage is rather more significant than the 1 ping that the Fifth Brother does, so you're going to be able to chip away and defeat something in possibly 2 attacks with Seventh Sister. I do have the Flamethrower as well, so if you attach the Flamethrower to her, then you can potentially, when Jango is deployed, exhaust up to 4 units with 1 attack. So yeah, she's particularly good in this deck. Heavy Persuader Tank I've kind of already just covered in conjunction with Darth Maul, but with Exploit 2, it can cost 5 or it can cost 3. And yeah, it's a good immediate value out of it because of the 2 damage, so you can exhaust. Count Dooku is an interesting one because of his when played, because whatever you use to exploit, you can then do damage to enemy units based on those exploited units' power. So you can actually get some quite ping combo chains, for want of a better phrase. It's not a very good sentence, but if I just jump ahead to this, for example, then if you exploit either of these in conjunction with Count Dooku, so let's say you exploit 2 elite starfighter things, then you've got 2 lots of 3 power that you can dish out to enemy units, and you've got 2 lots of 1 power that you can dish out to enemy units. So if you think about it, if you've got Jango deployed when you exploit Dooku, and you do either of these, or even a Ruthless Raider as well, then you've got potentially 4 different units you can damage via different amounts. And if you don't kill them, then if Jango's deployed, you can exhaust all of them as well. So that's the main reason I have him in here. And I think, yeah, I've only got one of him because I only showcase decks that I have the cards for. So if you've got more than one of Count Dooku, then likewise with Heavy Persuader Tank, you could probably make a better case for having another one of him rather than Darth Maul. Emperor Palpatine is the so-called bomb of the deck because He is the 8 cost, but you can deal 6 damage when he's played as you choose among enemy units, so that's space and ground and leaders if you want. And again, if Jango is deployed, then you could, if you're getting swarmed or in a bit of bother, deal 1 damage to 6 different units and exhaust all of them. So that is kind of the main reason we've got Emperor Palpatine in the deck, but also, even if you don't have Jango deployed, because of all the random passive damage ping effects that we've got in the deck, it's quite likely when you get to the point of Palpatine being able to deploy that you're going to be able to use 6 damage to finish off quite a few different units on your opponent's side. So that's kind of the dual purpose of Palpatine in this deck. His stats aren't great for an 8 cost, but as I say, it's the when played that we're particularly interested in. On to space, and the Rokai gunship is incredibly weak, but with Jango it's very good. So only 2 attack, which is fine, but when it's defeated, deal 1 damage to a unit or base. So again, you could run it into something in space and then use the 1 damage to exhaust something on the ground, for example. We'll get onto the wild card, which makes this card a lot better, potentially, in a bit, but yeah. Elite Starfighter, so got 3 of those, and this is arguably the best card in the deck for Jango because it has the 1 damage to a unit when it's both played and defeated. So you're going to get likely 2 exhausts out of this unit, and it's only a 3 cost. The Imperial Interceptor, so this is always good to help clear out the space arena because of its 3 damage when played. So if you don't defeat the space unit, then you could choose to exhaust it as well. So it all just works well with Jango. Pet's Fire Spray, I've only got 2 of these. Again, you could make an argument to have 3 of them, and I think the more space-heavy versions of the deck do have 3 of those in here. But that's also often combined with Triple Dark Raid, which I'm not running at all. So I'm sure we all know what it does, but yeah, 6 deploy, and then because you've got Jango as a leader, it comes in ready, so you can just hit their base for 5. It does have secondary action of exhausting a non-unique unit as well, which could jive quite well with Jango himself. I've never used it, and it has to be non-unique, so that does limit its viability, but it's an option, and it's unlimited as well. So because it doesn't exhaust the fire spray, so you can use it multiple times in a phase. And then finally, we've got Ruthless Raider in space. Again, because of Jango's ability, when played, do 2 damage, you can exhaust that unit as well. And then when defeated, again, you can exhaust an enemy unit. So yeah, just overall works very well with Jango. Now onto the wild card, and I genuinely think this is the best card in the game that no one plays. And I think that is because it does sound really counterintuitive and useless, but it's actually very good. So it's only cost 1, which is part of its power, but deal 1 damage to an enemy unit. Its controller's next action this phase must be an attack action with that unit if able. It must attack a unit if able. So it sounds really counterintuitive. Why would you want to pay 1 to have your opponent attack one of your units? Well, the main use, I guess the better way of looking at this is that you are stealing an action from your opponent. You are making them do something that they may not want to do. So if we think of some examples, so a good example is Sabine leader deploy, because a typical follow-up play of deploying Sabine leader is either a wing leader or attaching a Darksaber to her. Now, if you use Giving to Your Anger on her, she is going to be forced to attack into a unit, assuming you do have 1 deployed. So she only has 2 power, 5 health. 5 health is alright, but only 2 power. She's probably not going to kill whatever you've got out. She'll take damage back herself, so she'll only have maybe 2, 3 health at most. Although the 1 damage makes it unlikely she'll have 3 health. So she might have 2 health left, which then makes it much more plausible for you to be able to finish her off before your opponent can upgrade her. Similarly, let's think of some other leaders. Rey, you don't want a Jedi lightsaber on her, so use this on Rey leader. does 1 damage. She won't upgrade herself probably, so she'll kind of cancel that out, but then she'll take damage from whatever she's tagging into. So that's kind of one of the best utilities of this card, and that's why I do like it very much in red villainy. It is probably a bit less useful with Jango overall. There are definitely some other leaders where this works a lot better, like Emperor Palpatine, for example. But another good situation to use this in is if your opponent has got a Sentinel out, then again you could use this on their Sentinel. And then because Sentinels generally will have less attack power than most other units, their Sentinel is going to have to attack one of your units, which is not something you're typically going to want to do when you've got a Sentinel. Sentinel will probably get defeated, and then you can attack in with your unit as you wish. Another good use is if your opponent has got units hiding behind Sentinels that you can't get to. So as an example, when I was playing against a Rey, they had put 1 experience on an A-Wing, and it was behind a Concord Dawn Interceptors. Obviously, I couldn't get to that. I had an Imperial Interceptor deployed. So I used Give Into Your Anger on the A-Wing. It does 1 damage, so it's only got 3 health left. And then the opponent is forced to attack my Interceptor with the A-Wing. They're both dead. So this card, it just has great utility. It does take a bit of getting used to, but give it a go. You will not regret it. It is so good, and no one uses it, and it makes me sad. On to the other events. So, No Good to Me Dead, I'm sure I don't need to go over what that does. You don't always want to get the most value out of this, so even if your opponent has the initiative, all their opponents has taken the initiative, all of their units are already exhausted, etc., it can still be good to just use this on one of their units anyway, so that it is still exhausted for the next phase. It might feel like a bit of a waste, but it's probably not, to be honest. It just keeps the exhaust train going. So the other card that I don't particularly think many people are running with Jango is Relentless Pursuit. This is really the Jango leader is the only one you really want to use this with, because he's a bounty hunter. You can get a shield token for him, and the longer Jango survives, the better chance you have of winning the game. You can still win the game without Jango, to be fair, but it's going to make it so much more difficult for your opponent if Jango is just sticking around. So what does it do? He can capture any units that costs the same as or less than him, and he is a 5 cost. So if we have a look and think about some of the 5 costs that he can capture, and I've just thought of the more exciting / powerful ones that he would be able to capture. So Aayla Secura, that's going to be extremely significant to take her out. Darth Maul, pretty good to take him out. Ki-Adi-Mundi, we do often play more than one card with Jango, so being able to remove, I mean it is reliant on coordinate, but remove their effect is pretty good. Poe Dameron, a red heroism staple. He's extremely good. You're going to be very happy about capturing him and getting a shield off him. Rey, she's not used as much, but again, Rook, because he can kill anything so long as he does damage to it. He has kind of fallen off a bit. You don't see him around much anymore, but just an example. And Zuckuss, there's a lot of buzz around now there are 2 of them, and getting Zuckuss out really early, well, this is a good counter to that. So yeah, and if you can't capture a 5 cost because they haven't deployed one yet, then it's still a good card to use anyway, because it helps Jango's survivability and it takes something out that they've deployed, whether it's something that's got restore, something with a particularly troublesome on attack effect, or a sentinel, that kind of thing. So it still has a lot of utility outside of capturing a 5 cost unit. Onto the upgrades, and originally I did have more upgrades in the deck, but I kind of thought let's go for a bit more reliability rather than going all in on particular units. So Holdout Blaster is quite unassuming, but with Jango, because it says the attached unit deals 1 damage to a ground unit, it can activate his exhaust ability. Only does +1, but the when played is what we're most interested in. Fallen Lightsaber, we've got a good number of Force units, and if you have Jango deployed, then the on attack, as long as it's on a Force unit, you can exhaust the whole ground arena potentially. If you don't have Jango deployed, then at least you can just pick one that you want to exhaust whilst attacking their base. You don't even have to attack the units. Frozen in Carbonite helps to keep the exhaust train going, and you can exhaust, well, you can attach it to anything that's not a leader, so space as well. So if they deploy a massive bomb that you just can't handle, that's what I usually do. I deploy a Luke, I'm like, yeah, just freeze him over, thanks, not interested. And Vambrace Flamethrower, only got 2 of those because it is on the expensive side and the stats aren't great for it, but particularly good play is to put it on Jango, obviously, and then you can exhaust 3 units without even needing to attack a unit. So yeah, particularly powerful, or has very good potential with Jango. Onto some other options. Greedo is quite popular because if you discard a card and it's not a unit, then deal 2 damage to a ground unit, so that's another passive damage dealing effect to help the exhaust train going. Cloud Rider is a good one because it only costs 2, so it's viable in the later game with Jango because you just deploy this, get in 3 damage to whatever you want, and exhaust it at the same time. So even if it's a particularly powerful unit, you're still getting good value out of a Cloud Rider, and eventually their big unit will get killed just by the damage adding up. Freelance Assassin, I would probably view as a 5 cost because with Jango, when played, you're going to want to pay the extra 2 probably to deal 2 damage to then be able to get the exhaust benefit out of it. So on the face of it, a 3 cost, but I would view it as a 5 cost. Open Fire, just for a bit more removal. I think we've probably got enough of that anyway with the random passive damage that we're doing. Similarly with Bosk, I would say probably mainly have him in for the ambush effect rather than the event, because in this deck, I've only got, is it 9 events? Yeah, I've only got 9 events, so you're not going to get the 2 damage all that often. IG-11, because you'll have damaged ground units on your opponent's side, you're probably going to be able to get the on attack, which will then also be able to exhaust the damaged ground unit if it's still around. So yeah, just a few additional options that I could think of off the top of my head in the context of this deck, not necessarily what others are doing with Jango online. So yeah, overall, I think this deck is, or this archetype, whatever you want to call it, is going to be sticking around for a while. Whether it will be one of the best choices and, like, you know, up there with Sabine, etc., then I don't know. What I would say as well when playing this deck is that you're not always going to want to have used all of your actions and plays before taking the initiative. For example, if you've slapped a flamethrower on Jango, you're not necessarily always going to want to attack with Jango that phase. You might want to take the initiative straight away, because then if whatever your opponent's got on the ground, if they've got 3 units, the first thing you do, attack with Jango into base, exhaust their whole ground arena, and then you're off to the races. So yeah, sometimes you will still have plays or resources that you've not used, but taking the initiative early can actually be the better play to make, if that makes sense. So it does require perhaps thinking a little bit differently and thinking about sequencing as well. But yeah, let me know what you think and how you play Jango. Do you think he's going to be towards the top of the meta, or is it just kind of a flash in the pan that everyone's got really excited about? Let me know what decks or leaders you want me to check out in the future. I do have a Nala Se and Padme in mind at the moment, so I think we'll probably go with one of them to balance out the fact that Jango seems to be very good. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.